In this episode of ADHme, ADHwe, got to talk to a wonderful person who I also call my friend. His name is Bram. He lives in the Netherlands, and we got connected through the Slack channel about burnout, I believe, in the CNCF Slack. And since then, been able to talk back and forth about our experiences, and finally got to sit down to record this episode of the podcast. Bram has had 2 different burnouts, has had a very rich experience, and has a lot to share in terms of what he's gone through, what he's learned, and what you can get from that too. I think if anything that I want to emphasize here is that ADHD is a process, right? It is ongoing in different ways for different people. And it's very important to be mindful of that, to be conscious of that, in order to know that how things are right now doesn't necessarily mean how they're going to be in the near future. I don't say that in a bad way. I just say it in the sense of being patient with yourselves, being understanding with yourselves, giving yourself the space that you need, giving yourself permission to make mistakes. Let's check out what Bram had to say in this episode of ADHme, ADHwe. So, lots of different elements to consider about ADHD, some of which can range from medication, which one's the right one for you, where do you draw the line about when it's helpful and when it perhaps can become a little bit slippery. A lot of different things to take into consideration. That being said, I'm joined today by Bram, who's joining me from a town in the Netherlands, which I will not try to pronounce. I'll let him do that.
Yeah.
But Bram, welcome to ADHme, ADHwe.
Thanks, man. How are you? Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah,
Really
good.
excited.
This has been a long time coming from different conversations on Slack as well as on LinkedIn. And it's been interesting, been seeing what you've been doing professionally for a while because of contact with the company where you work.
Yeah.
But now being able to connect on this particular point, I'm really, really glad about it. And also glad that we'll get into this later. You mentioned some of the things that you got from one of our other episodes. That being said, can you just give a quick intro to who you are, where you are, since I mentioned your town?
Yeah.
And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, my name is Bram. I'm 43, getting old. I have 4 kids. My oldest one is 22. And then I have 3 other kids with my wife. And those, they are almost 8, 6, and 4. We live in Assendelft. That's difficult to pronounce. In the Netherlands. And I work for Bright Blue. I got a full stack shirt on. Sorry. Oh, camera. I used to work for Full Stack when we were still a small company. We grew pretty fast, and there were a lot of Azure engineers. And then we decided to start up an Azure company as well, which is called Bright Blue. Currently working over there as the little sibling of Full Stack.
All right. Very good. That being said, when did your ADHD story start? What was the beginning like?
Yeah. Well, about 10 years ago, I had a pretty severe burnout. And it happened when I did the Dam to Dam, you know, the run. It's from Zaandam to Amsterdam. It's like 10 miles. And when I crossed the line, I just collapsed. I ran it with a fever, which was also not too smart. But I was running for a good cause. People gave me money for it to give it to the good cause. So I felt obligated to go running. So I went running. And then I was at home, and my heart just went up to 200. And then 10 minutes later, it just went down, and it just kept on going for days. I tried to go to work the next day though. But I had a massive anxiety attack at work, and I barely got home by car. And then my manager said, "Well, it sounds a little bit like you got a burnout." So he called me in sick. I went to a counselor that worked for ING, where I was working at the moment. And after some talks, he referred me to a psychologist. And after hearing my story, which was a couple of years leading up to the moment, she said, "Well, it sounds like you got ADHD." And why did she think that? I said, up to the point where I just collapsed after the finish line. I was single for a long time, so I went out a lot. But after a full-time job, I also went to college at night, doing homework at night. So I was almost sitting behind my laptop till 12 o'clock every night. But also going out a lot with friends, but also running, but running to the point where it wasn't healthy anymore. So after a night out, I would just go running for 10, 15 miles again the next day. Yeah, and I just destroyed my body. I think it was just snap and it was done. The days after when I collapsed, I couldn't stand on my feet anymore for more than a minute. Anxiety attacks, my heart rate just went up and down. So I really, really, messed up my body. So the psychologist referred me to a company that's called CQ in the Netherlands. I got the diagnosis over there after filling in a whole bunch of paperwork and talks with my mom and dad and my wife alongside. And I got some medication and a week of time management course. And that was a little bit how it went the first time. I didn't really do anything with it after I quit the medication. Didn't do anything with the whole ADHD part. And then last year, May, got into another burnout. So yeah, now I'm really focused. I'm really trying to understand more about the whole ADHD part and what it does to me and what I need to change to prevent from just going into the extreme with everything and burning out myself again.
I think, well, a few different things that you mentioned there. Despite being aware that you might have the tendency to be spread too thin or, not being able to define limits, I think that's something that we've heard about in other conversations that I'm very conscious of myself, having been put in situations and probably just not even using the term burnout, but definitely feeling burned out. What is the definition of a burnout as opposed to something that's just close or being tired?
Yep.
Maybe that's something you can comment on really quickly. For you, what does burnout mean?
Well, for me, burnout was when I also physically couldn't do anything anymore. I just started. My whole body was worn out. It was just no energy, but also anxiety attacks. Also, periods of time where I had felt like having depressions where you didn't think, nothing was fun anymore. And that came in, also went away at points, but yeah, I think and I couldn't concentrate at all. Nothing happened anymore between the ears. It was just numb because my body also, I think, was so messed up that it needed all the energy to recover that nothing happened anymore.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I think once again, just like with ADHD, these, where there's a very wide range of different things that affect people in different ways. Yep. Sometimes there are things in common. I think, like I said, burnout somewhat can be subjective, but your definition sounds like a very good one. In terms of the diagnosis process, how was that, and what were some of the things that you identified then that perhaps in the second time it coming around, were there different things that you noticed, or was it relatively similar?
Well, it's been 10 years ago, but with the diagnosis, I remember that I wasn't really committed to dealing and coping with ADHD and also mental health issues that often come along with the ADHD. So I think it was two things didn't really go well. It was I didn't have a person over there that I had a connection with to talk about stuff. And also the medication at that time didn't work for me, or the kind of medication that I had, which I turned into a zombie. But when I was taking Ritalin, so I quit that, and I was just not really. I thought I'll just deal with it myself. I don't need it all. I don't need to look after all that stuff, and just went on with life as it was and fell into bad habits. But now this time, of course, it was the second time, but pretty serious burnout. And my wife also said, I still want to have a long life with you. I don't want you to be not being able to do anything anymore because you just screwed up your body too much by always going over the limit with everything and struggling with stress and from the mental health issues. So that was really a wake up call for me to say, okay, I really need to do something about this and look into it, and medication or not, yeah, at least I need someone to talk to, and that can help me out with the mental health issues that come along, but also still looking for one for someone that can coach me, and not like with the psychologist that does like once every couple of weeks, but I just really need somebody who can help me out with some basic stuff once in a while, and keep me focused on doing and planning for the week, and doing what I need to do, and making sure that I also build in enough rest for myself. And I don't want to ask my wife to do it too much because we don't want her to sound like my mom. So yeah, still looking for one.
Okay, I think that's a good point. And I in my experience before, so getting diagnosed, and that was with a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and then continuing after the diagnosis process. And I will say that like I was not given a manual about first you're going to do this and then you're going to do that.
Yep.
And it was the diagnosis, and it was kind of like, now you're on your own.
Have fun.
And that's hard. So my recommendation, just as personal experience, talk to other folks that have ADHD,
Yep.
See what they've done. It doesn't mean that's what you have to do, but at least have something in mind about, and I think it would be helpful, in the future, hopefully maybe through this podcast, of putting together some generic template resources so that people can just keep these things in mind. It's not prescriptive. It's not saying do this or do that, but saying it may be helpful to consider some of these options. And one of them, just like with tech, make community part of your solution. And so I think it's the same thing here. The people that can understand it best are the people who've gone through it themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
But before I go off on too many ADHD tangents, going back to what I was saying is, so after I got my diagnosis, I met with a psychiatrist, and we talked about the possibilities of different medications, things like that. And that was its own process. But eventually I realized, because I was seeing a psychologist from the United States for different reasons that I had started before getting diagnosed, and I realized that I needed to be with someone who was more specialized in ADHD. And so I found the Adult ADHD podcast from the UK to be quite helpful, as both the hosts, shout out to them, but both the hosts have ADHD and they also do coaching services. And so I got in touch with one of them, and we did a few sessions, and it was very helpful in a practical sense, like what you were saying about time management and also being kind to yourself in the process. Because, and that's like I said, if I ever create any generic template of things to follow, is that build in a self-kindness strategy, because I don't want to say you're gonna need it, but it's very helpful. And if you're hard on yourself in this process, why make something that's difficult more difficult than than necessary? What I want to touch on though here is, in your case, some of these more practical elements that you would like to get more help with, where you think that a coach might be more helpful than a psychologist. It sounds like you mentioned time management and having time to rest. That's something that I find difficult as well, about the feeling like I always need to be at work, or I always need to have that I'm always like behind on stuff, or that everything's going to collapse. What are some of the things that you would like to improve in a practical sense?
Yeah, especially and it sounds really stupid for people who do not have that issue, is but just to for instance look on Sunday night or what's coming up for the week, and did I schedule something that costs energy, and did I schedule something behind it that also costs me energy, or do I make sure that I look after myself by not scheduling a full agenda, and making sure that the different things that you schedule maybe sometimes cost you energy, but also can give you energy, and making sure I stick to that. I think that's for me, because a lot of times I just, oh yeah, it's fine, and I'll just accept, and then my whole agenda is full with all this stuff, and then I live on reminders, so I always put in a reminder at least an hour ahead, and then I look at it like, I don't feel like doing this, or I can't, or yeah. So that doesn't work, and you beat yourself down for that, because then you're gonna cancel stuff. You're gonna beat yourself down for that, because you feel bad for doing that to the other person by canceling stuff. So that's also the part where you be kind for yourself. And I think time
Agreed.
management, looking after it, would help. And yeah, I've talked about it with my wife about how she can help, but it's difficult not to get into like a mother-son relationship if your wife is keeping track of what you can and can't do, or what you should look after for, and that she has to point that out all the time. So I think an ADHD coach could really help me with that.
Agreed. And I think, as with the same thing, we talk a lot in tech, how there is no silver bullet, there's no silver bullet on this stuff, and everyone has to find what's going to work based on the resources they have available. I would say that I consider myself to be very lucky to have access to a lot of resources, and also it depends on what country you're in as well too.
Yep.
I mean, like when it comes to medication, do you have to pay out of pocket, or is there some government coverage for that, or through health insurance plans? Going back to the specific thing though about planning is that, I've read a fair amount from Cal Newport, who talks a lot about, being a digital minimalist and a lot of things around planning and having a sort of, quarterly plan, and then a monthly plan, a weekly plan, a daily plan. In an ideal world, all those things would happen. But more specifically on the point that you mentioned, something that's difficult for me is the thing about scheduling. And I look at my calendar and I feel like there's some evil enemy out there who's filled up my calendar. But the evil enemy is me.
Yeah.
Because before saying yes to something, I often don't take the time to say, well, let me look and make sure that this actually works best for me, not in a selfish sense, but to make sure that I can provide what's necessary to the other person who's maybe going to have some expectations, which are totally natural. And it's having time blocked in my calendar so that certain things cannot be affected. Like when my wife arrives home from work, that we always get to spend at least 30, 45 minutes together to catch up. And then if I have other meetings, then I can continue with them afterwards. But is making sure that those things are programmed.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the part about reminders, and it seems quite typical from talking to some of our other guests, like Zach, who we had in the beginning, in the first episode. He mentioned about, you can use every single tool about task management, whether it's Evernote or Trello or like all those different things. And it may work really well, and then all of a sudden, boom, I get tired of it. I stop using it. And it doesn't mean you have to use one specific tool, but just something. It can be a document. It can be your own calendar with reminders set up. Something that's going to be there as a support system is very helpful.
Yeah.
At the same time, I understand your point very well about not wanting to overburden your wife in this case. It's just thinking about what are the options that might be available, either through your work, coworkers that are there, other applications that can help out in this specific case as well, looking for a coach. And, you speak English very, very well, so that's not an issue. That it doesn't have to be in Dutch, although sometimes doing things in your own language is really nice.
Yeah.
So I just always encourage folks, go out there and look for different resources, see what kind of things might be available at a local level, and just be open to the trial and error process. That not everything's going to work perfectly on the first go. In terms of how your ADHD affects you at work, because we're lucky enough to interview somebody else who's in your area.
Yeah.
And he has, his sort of experience with what goes on with ADHD, which could be related to difficulty remembering things, so needing reminders again as well. Other aspects of, the passion and of starting something, which is a wonderful experience that generates a lot of dopamine.
Yeah.
And then the lack of dopamine when it comes to maintaining or, executing, finalizing a project, anticipating some of those things and being transparent with coworkers, not as an excuse, but just to say, hey, look, when it gets to this phase, I might need a little bit of extra, support here or there.
Yep.
What are some of the things that you've noticed in terms of how it affects your work in good ways or in ways that you're trying to work on?
Well, what I've learned about myself, looking back, is that for me, it works best working with a team where we discuss the work that needs to be done and also put like deadlines on it, and that there is a checkup in the morning, like a stand-up to discuss what you have done. I've noticed that if I work on a project by myself and it's pretty big, and I have nobody who checks me or there's no deadline, I just don't start. And when I think I need to start, I don't have the focus to be able to start, and just make sure I cut it up in really small pieces and that you have small to-do lists to do. And then you're gonna beat up yourself again because you know that you need to start doing something, but you just can't. And that makes you also feel less about yourself, and you're gonna beat yourself up about it, that you're not being productive as that you want to be. So that's for me, it works in an environment where there's like a bit of control over what I do, or not control, but that you have to share with your team what you're busy with and what you're going to do, but also discuss the work with the team and make clear what you need to do, and why. Also the why. if you don't know why you're doing something, then interest also loses quickly, and that doesn't help with getting the focus. And like I said, I also got that hyper focus. I normally get that when I'm near a deadline. So if I have a whole week, I'll do, at least at school, I did it at the last night, and that always got me through school, no problems. But of course, working life, that's not gonna work eventually. So I think that's why the daily stand-ups about what you're doing, but also checking if you're doing okay and doing what you need to do. That for me, that works. Being by myself, not clear what to do and how, with no overview from somebody else at all, with no deadlines, that's just meant to create chaos for me and turn into a disaster.
Yeah, I understand. And in my case, sometimes doing a lot of work and someone will say, great, but we asked you to do this. And it's like,
overthinking the whole thing.
Yeah, overthinking the whole thing and over
complex.
Yeah, and over delivering, and then also because of the assumption that I'm doing everything wrong, that's like I need to do 10 times more than what I've been asked to, because if not, they're not going to be happy, the people pleasing aspect. And so before starting something, to say, just to be absolutely sure, breaking those tasks down into smaller tasks so that and why they're being done as well, because this is how it connects to a bigger objective. I think those are all things that give a lot more peace of mind when you know, okay, this is what they're expecting from me. If I decide to do something additional, that's on me. But what is it that's actually being asked for, so that I don't, run off and then once again getting spread too thin, getting very frustrated, but then having to say, well, look, the only person who told you had to do that was you. Nobody else said that.
Well, I don't know if it's a ADHD thing or that it's also has to do with other mental health stuff. Is that you also, at least I made it pretty difficult for myself by being afraid of asking for help. If you don't understand something, or not fully understand it, or not exactly know how to pick up a bigger project and cut it down in thinner slices, but just being able to ask for help, that would make life a lot easier because people are always willing to help you out most of the times. But that's something that was hard for me, that it's working on it and still hard, but that makes it easier as well for me.
Agreed. And I think a lot of times, not wanting to bother people or be a burden, but like asking for help. If you're asking for help every 3 minutes, obviously that's a different level. but it's something that I've struggled with a lot is the notion of asking for help when I need it and just thinking like, no, like it's my responsibility. I need to do it. But then same thing, getting into these situations of being really, really hard on myself and starting from the premise of nobody wants you to suffer.
No.
Like, who is it that's out there saying, yeah, I really want this to be horrible for you, to be painful. I create that situation, I think, much more often than anybody else does.
Yeah, I think so. I always also think for the other person a lot of times. So like, oh, they probably don't want to be bothered at the moment because they're busy as well. And I also think that for me, the issues I had with being able to concentrate and read something and try to understand something new, there was such a big frustration. You feel stupid because you think, hey, why is somebody else able to go through some documentation of a tool and they just understand, and I'm not even able to read one sentence without being distracted all the time and not being able to pick it up. And that also really, well, doesn't help the mental health, that part. And since I started the medication, I must say that the concentration is a lot better. So if I have to learn new stuff to be able to do something, it makes it way easier to learn new stuff, which also makes me feel better about myself, but also it makes me more at ease to ask questions because you think, hey, you can at least talk about the subject and explain what you understand already, instead of saying, hey, yeah, I wasn't being able to read anything and I have no clue what it is. Can you please explain to me or show me hands-on? That's how I used to do it, is just being hands-on and getting it to work. With reading, that was no option. But I would say that with the medication and being able to concentrate and focus for a long period of time also helps with the mental health with regards to feeling good about yourself and also feeling good enough about yourself to be able to ask questions to other people without feeling stupid.
Yep, these are great points, and I want to talk a little bit more about the medication aspect. It's something that, in one way or another, generally comes up in these conversations, and it's something that I think is helpful to explain to others because a lot of in my process, when talking to different people, even before getting diagnosed or in the beginning of the, soon after the diagnosis came out, a lot of people that don't have ADHD or have family members with ADHD were saying, but don't do the medication thing. Like, don't do it. Like, yeah. That's going to change your personality. And I understand where those doubts come from, like, very well. So I'm not angry about that. And people say that out of respect and care and trust and saying, but you can do it. Like, you've done all these things up until now. Like, you don't need that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I completely respect every person I've talked to with ADHD that looks at this particular topic differently. But you did mention about how when you got diagnosed 10 years ago that you had the experience that you had with Ritalin. And you've mentioned some of the benefits that you've seen with medication. What's your view on it now? And what are maybe some things that, based on your experience, you feel like others should know?
Well, yeah, it also depends, of course, how the medication just does its job for everyone. I think it's for everyone. It's maybe different how the medication works. When I started using Ritalin, it felt nice and quiet within within my head, but nothing happened anymore. So I was turning a little bit into a zombie, and for me that was nice, and it was some peace and quiet. But of course, for my wife, that wasn't so much fun. So I quit, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe the medication is just not something that doesn't work for me. So like I said, I wasn't really open-minded or open to really try to work with the ADHD and try to cope with it. So I was like, okay, I'll just do it myself, like I've always done. But then, like last year, like, I need to do something about that being restless all the time, not being able to concentrate, because I noticed that it really affects my mental health because I overthink it a lot. Um, and then we tried dexamphetamine right now. That feels less strong, and started with a low dosage. And I remember the first time that I took it, I was like, "Whoa, this is nice." I was relaxed. I was being able to concentrate a lot better, and there was like a filter that made me think about saying stuff right away, or just think about it and not say stuff right away. Because before the medication, there was no filter, and if I would just spit out anything that came up, and I didn't have any chance to think about what I said. It was already out. That doesn't always work with people, especially it can offend and be a little bit rude to people.
But even in the Netherlands, where people are generally very direct.
Yeah, but
That's a silly
sometimes I hear
topic.
that I can be pretty direct, even by Dutch people. So
Okay.
yeah, but I noticed, especially with at home with 3 kids, it's always busy, especially since they're still small. So you're always being how do you call it in English? Overstimulated. So it's tough to get a bit of peace of quiet, and with 3 kids, and that also, well, you could get agitated a little bit easily with the ADHD and being overstimulated. Yeah, you could just snap at somebody without being able to block it and think about it. Hey, that's unfair for me to say or do. And with the medication, that really helps for me to have that filter and think about stuff that I want to say before I actually do it. Because a lot of times it was not fair. I'd rather do it without the medication, but if the medication works, it makes me a better, or at least it helps me in life, then yeah, why not?
Yeah. And for right now, the thing is to talk about what it's going to be like in 10 years. I think if I've learned anything in this ADHD experience is that focus on the here and now, be kind to yourself.
Yep.
Don't be in a rush. There's always time to explore different options. And I really just can't stress enough. And now I want to ask you about this is, when did you start talking to other people that have ADHD?
Well, when I first called in sick because of the burnout in May, I talked to somebody who also had ADHD, and just the recognition of the stuff that you go through, and it just makes you feel a little bit better about yourself with a little bit of hope. I was like, oh, I'm not the only one that's experiencing all these issues that you have, and stuff that you run into, and like trying to have a bit of a normal life that anybody else has. So I was like, because that gave me a good feeling, I tried to set up a meetup group where people could join, and where we tried to create like a safe environment where people would just feel safe enough to tell their stories and share advice or tips or do's and don'ts, or just listen to other people's story. So I just hope that by creating those communities, we could create a little bit of more awareness, but that it's also more, that it makes it easier for people to talk about it, instead of not mentioning it and trying to mask all those things that you can run into with ADHD, because that the masking will get you in trouble and eventually burn out. And I think that's why a lot of people also get diagnosed at a later age, is because they've been able to mask it all the time, and then run into it later in life and by just burning out.
Yeah. I think the masking point is one that comes up quite a bit, and for everyone it's a bit of a different experience, and like you said, until you start talking to other people that are in that situation, or many of them not even realizing that they're doing it, and a lot of this sorts of opens up like a lot of, internal conversations and reflections about, who you are. Because, some, like some of our guests were on the podcast were diagnosed as children. So they've had it from, that they've had that as part of their life from an earlier age. I got diagnosed at the age of 36.
Yep.
And so then you go back to 0 and work your way all the way through and thinking about a lot of experiences and emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitivity, dysphoria, and all the things that go, being impulsive, interrupting people, talking too much, information dumping,
Buying stuff all the time without thinking.
ADHD hit the ADHD bingo. But specifically with the topic of masking, of how a lot of people don't realize, just how hard that is, of feeling like you can't really be yourself. And so I think, like you said, creating spaces where people don't have to worry about that, and that saying like, look, we're having these conversations to get these things out in the open so that they're not so uncomfortable, I think is a very important thing for just about anything.
Yep.
Like one of the things that in my personal experience too is one of my family members has had a chronic illness for 25 years. Has been extremely isolating because of not being able to talk to a lot of other people that are in a similar situation, because of the very unique factors that affect you. And so there was a masking process going on through all that as well, with my family, of wanting to be normal and just trying really hard to do normal things. And the amount of energy that takes is absolutely exhausting. And I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
It's a mental thing, but also, like in my case, it was also physical, but just doing everything too much, like going out, but working out, switching jobs to just get that dopamine thing flowing again, and going into extreme situations. And then I must say, I don't know if still looking into that, but there were also periods of time where if I just wasn't burnout, but maybe like I just needed to get some rest for a week, and then I would be fine again. But if I would stay at home those first couple of days, it would just be empty. But that it also felt good because I didn't feel restless. I didn't have that, like, the urge to do certain cravings or certain urges to do. So I was also maybe somehow not thinking about it directly myself, but unconsciously maybe getting into that stage of burning yourself, your body, wearing your body down, just to get that physical restlessness out of your system, and not feeling those urges and cravings for certain things anymore. I don't know if that's if that is possible, but because it's not a fun situation, but at least I felt relaxed, and I got to sit at home and all quiet and recharge again. Not the right way to deal with stuff, of course, but I think that was one of the things how I dealt with it in the wrong way.
But I think the best thing is that you're learning from that, and that you're aware of that, and that and the worst thing that can happen, well, not the worst thing, but if you're not learning from those things, if you're not saying, okay, what can I do to avoid this? What were the things that made this happen? This was a symptom of, different things that have been going on. And, whether it's, I'm going to look at all the commitments that I have. I'm going to see which ones I can get out of or reduce or delegate. It's always just reminding yourself, because I struggle with this a lot, is feeling like everything's this way and there's nothing I can do. That's not true. That's not true at all. Like, and I tell other people that all the time, but applying the same advice to yourself is always much more difficult. And there is a way out. So you have to first believe that things can be better before you can actually, start, making more tactical decisions about, okay, I'm going to remove this time slot here. I'm going to give myself a little bit more time to rest and things like that. But I just always encourage folks that, as difficult as things may seem, as dark as, things may appear, there are always options. And I think that, you've got to maintain that. And that's, like I said, building in that self-kindness. So now I want to get to that. What are, because you commented some things that we have in common. We both like kickboxing, different elements of sports. What are some of the things that you like to do in your free time? What are things that you enjoy?
Well, I used to like all sports. I also did all sports. I was running. I was doing triathlon, I was kickboxing, I was cycling, I was doing it all. And I must say, since I have 3 little kids in a couple of years' time, plus burnouts and the pandemic, I must say that I'm a little bit. There's not really the urge for working out anymore or playing sports like I used to have before. After my burnout last year, I tried to work out again with a personal trainer. But as soon as I started working out again, I noticed that I once again go for. I just went too hard on myself, so would always overdo it, which would always cause some physical issues the days after. I would not feel well. So, but my son Dex, he plays soccer. He's in under 8, and I help out with the training twice a week, and I just play a bit of soccer as well with them. So I try to play along with them during training, and on Saturday I guide them with the matches. So that makes me go outside, but also be busy again and keep on moving. And the funny thing is that I know it because it makes me feel better being outside and being physically busy. But it's still difficult for me to go running again or cycling again because I always have that issue that I think that I need to run like 12 kilometers per hour, need to cycle 30 kilometers an hour. So I've to be a little bit more kind to myself. Like, okay, the extra pounds, okay, they need to go, but for now it's okay. And I'm at the moment I'm fine with just helping out and being outside with helping with training Dex and his team, and that's it for me at the moment. And I at the moment I'm fine with that. I'm not beating myself up anymore that I either overdo it or that I don't do anything at all anymore. So that's for me that's at the moment the right way to go. I know that we talked about the kickboxing before. That for me was if I'm physically feeling good, that's kickboxing is really good for me because without medication, I feel so restless. But once I just go for kickboxing for an hour, I'm totally relaxed, and it's just to let all the energy go. And I don't know what it is. You hear so many people who have the same with kickboxing, just punching and kicking against the back, just gets frustration, energy, and everything out. Yeah, it just feels good.
And I think it goes back to as well, dopamine deficiencies.
Yep.
Like there's and the thing is, I've loved contact sports and martial arts since I was a kid, and it's always been something interesting for me. Although I always have to tell this to people, like I've never been in a street fight in my life, and I don't plan on getting one. Like the thing is, because people, are you a violent person? And the thing is, I've had when I say violent reactions, I want to mean very strong reactions, and generally verbal and things like that. But to be totally transparent, I was the kind of kid that when I would get angry, would kick my door. When I was 8 years old, I broke one of my bedroom windows with a hockey stick. It was just a complete overreaction to a very silly thing. And so in that sense, I would say like reactions that are very negative and toxic, and also towards myself. But in the sense of enjoying combat sports, it's never been about hurting somebody else. It's mostly just been about discipline and you said the stress relief and just kind of getting everything out there. Yep. But going back to your other point about, with exercise, because like I also like running and like I enjoy lots of different sports, but is understanding that, what's good enough is good enough, and that finding that right balance to the point where it's helpful but doesn't become an obligation, or like I need to be there 5 days a week, or if I don't lose this amount of weight, then this is a total failure. It's just building in some realistic expectations based on the other things you have going. I think that's a really important point. But
what feels good. And I find it always difficult because when I think back at what I used to do, and I could run fast, and I could cycle fast, and I did triathlons and stuff like that. And I was doing pretty okay with kickboxing and stuff like that. But then beat yourself up. Hey, why can't I do that anymore? But it's I think it's also because of all the stuff that I did to my own body that it's a little bit. Yeah, I don't think I can do the same anymore. Of course, I'm also getting older, but I think it's all the little stuff that I've done in the last 10 years weren't so good for my body. So I think that's also not helping with being able to perform at that level with sports anymore. And finding ways to play sports in a more fun way and enjoy yourself instead of being more of a stress on your body physically.
Yep.
What I used to do to deal with the restlessness and the build up energy and frustrations. Yeah.
That's a good point. And also, I talked about this with my psychologist because I now have a psychologist who specializes in ADHD. And shout out to you, Marina, if she's listening. Anyway, she's based in Spain, but she's really, really good. And when, a basic question that I've been asked multiple times by different psychologists is, how do you take care of yourself? And so very often coming back with the answer of, well, I do lots of sports.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is good. And I've even heard, every case is different. I've even heard some people say, like, if you have the choice between therapy and sports, sometimes sports can be more beneficial. But like I said, that's not clinically proven at all. I'm not saying that as a fact. It is that it's good, but if it's the only thing that you're doing or your primary thing, and be like, well, this is where I go and I let all my stress. Yeah, but what about different things in your life to avoid creating the stress that you then need to release by doing sports? You can still have all the fun that you want with sports, and it's a really good thing to do to feel better, but there are other things that need to be kept in mind there. And so I think it's just also like with ADHD. If you only see medication as, that 99% of the results are going to come through that, I think that's a mistake. But once again, depending on the case, depending on the person, finding other ways to have a more holistic approach, like you said, whether it's coaching, whether it's talking to other people with ADHD, whether it's getting informed by reading books, listening to podcasts. I think everyone has to find something that works for them, but never, I would say it's probably best to avoid, betting everything on just one singular strategy. And trying to have a few different things built in there because there's going to be trial and error, and to not get upset of like, well, I'm taking the medication. Why is it working?
Yeah.
Well, because there's probably more to it than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think what also helps for me is talking to somebody, and you need to find someone uh, who you are willing to open up for about everything that you're dealing with. Because if you don't have a connection with somebody, it's going to be a difficult session then. But I think that with ADHD, a lot of times I think people also have some mental issues that come along with it, or because of it, or together with it. And for me, it also helps because sometimes it's not always ADHD. It can also be because of some stuff that happened in the past that doesn't help either, to figure out why you're doing certain stuff. It's not always because of ADHD, because when I first went to the psychologist, I just blamed it all on ADHD. It's like, and then I got to certain conclusions that ADHD can be a part of it, but it's not always why you act the way you act. And an example is like when I was little, not like I'm the smartest, but I didn't have any issues at school. And they always said, well, if Bram would do a little bit more or put more effort in it, he would do better. I was like, yeah, okay, but people don't see that I'm trying to study or learn, but I just can't because I can't focus. So then I got away with it by doing everything at the last minute, procrastinating everything. But if people tell you all the time that you're not putting in the effort that you should, and you're not giving your best, and that you always leave it till the end, at the last minute, that can also have impact on your mental state of mind. And yeah, for me, that also worked in a bad way with not being able to ask for help because people might think that you're not doing your best, or stuff like that. So that, yeah, I think that sometimes the mental health, or at least the psychologist or somebody to talk to about why you're doing stuff, can help, and not blame it all on ADHD right away.
I think that's a really good point, because it's not like ADHD is the only thing that you are.
No.
You know, you are much more than
Because
that.
the medication can help, but not with
in every
everything.
sense.
It
Yeah.
makes me feel more relaxed, and it can help me focus, but it doesn't take away other impulsive stuff. Like, I still buy shit without I shouldn't be doing it. And my wife's like, "Oh, I spent too much again." Like, yep, sorry.
Oh yeah,
And
compulsive spending.
yeah, or making impulsive decisions about stuff. And time management is not solved with taking medication. It's on those those kind of tasks, and those executive tasks. It doesn't help the medication. So yeah, you need to.
I think understanding that, and that it may create a context through which it's easier to do that, but it's not going to do your work for you.
Nope, no.
And so if you're expecting that, you're going to be sorely disappointed, and that it's going to be a 180-degree change, whatever. Like I said, everybody's case works differently, and also getting the right dosage, like, that takes time. And the problem that I find here, though, Bram, is that like I said earlier, when I got started, that I was given no information. And it's not that I understand it's not exact science and everyone's going to react differently, but I wasn't told everyone's going to react differently. And I was given some information about the different medications that were out there, but I felt that there was enough stuff that was missing. That was one of the reasons of wanting to start this podcast. And in addition, eventually, is to be thinking about resources that could be helpful. And so having different guests with different opinions to say, hey, if we had to choose, 5 tips that would be really practical. A lot of this stuff is already out there, but with different things regarding how this is a process with different processes inside of it, I think would have been very helpful for me prior to getting diagnosed to understand. And like I said, there are other people that are talking about this, but particularly in the cloud native ecosystem, to get that out there, so that saying like, hey, are you thinking about getting diagnosed? Are you being diagnosed? Have you been diagnosed? Depending on that, which phase you're in, these may be some things you might want to take into consideration. You don't have to, but just saying, these are things that I wish I had. It's like any startup, like people realize like, oh, it would be wonderful to have this functionality or this, feature on this particular app. Why don't I go build it? It's kind of the same idea there.
Yeah, I think that, I think that what I missed the most is what I've learned first, that talking to other people. I'm still at the beginning. Since in the last couple of months, I've been looking into it more and more, and see how I need to change things to make it work. But there's a lot of people who already experienced a whole lot of stuff and have good advice and do's and don'ts and tips and tricks that might work. And talking to people about it really helps. And then together with being with good resources, because if you Google it, just Google, you can find anything on the internet. But with people who have good resources and read about it, that could really help. I think a really good idea, because actually, now you mentioned it, is that there is somebody whose kid just got diagnosed with ADHD from she's within the community that I started. There are waiting lists, so she can't go to a therapist or counseling with family counseling and helping her, and how to deal with her son and stuff like that. Then she needs to just look for resources out there to read about all of it, so she can help her son deal with it. So I think some sort of list with resources
and a short one.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is to make lists, and I'm like, oh, I can get to 400. But it's just, so it's not overwhelming. And also part of it depends on what country you're in, because what we said is like the diagnosis process here in Spain is totally different. It's not saying better or worse, it's just different. The support that's available from the public health system is different. Talking to folks that are in the UK, Netherlands, Norway, United States, it's different everywhere.
Yeah, because what baffles me is that here in Holland, you go first to see your family doctor, and they will write you they refer you to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and then you talk about maybe getting diagnosed, and then there are specialists who are allowed to do the diagnosis, because a family doctor is not allowed to do it. But then, like, I know my oldest daughter, she lives in Canada, she could just go to a family doctor and he can do the diagnosis. Like, but is he an expert at it? Or, because...
No, it ranges widely. I think, once again, the main thing is that make other people who have knowledge and experience about this, part of the solution, as you would with anything. Like, if you're going to be running Azure on Kubernetes, probably a good idea to talk to somebody who's already done it. It's just not, and don't be afraid, because I also think people will find that the ADHD community is people that definitely want to help because they've been there, they've gone through that.
Yeah.
And so that's
judging.
No, exactly. No judgment. No one's going to say, oh, there's something wrong with you. No, absolutely not.
Like the stupid thing is that when I first got the diagnosis, people like, you're not hyperactive. It's like, no, but I do a lot of stuff to mask all that restless stuff in my body by doing all the wrong stuff that, you don't see it. And then like, oh, okay. Well, everybody is bit restless once in a while. Like, it's really need to explain. It's a whole wide area of
there's much more than that. And that's also what we said, before getting started, is that, and different things that have already come out in some of the podcasts, is that while some people might think like, oh, just like you have trouble sitting still, it's like, I wish it was only that. Believe me.
That would be it.
And to understand, but like I said, I can't blame people for their lack of knowledge about it, and I am in a privileged position to be able to help out. So that's, like I said, that's what all these conversations are about, because there are some things that are in common, but everybody has a completely different experience. And it makes it a little bit challenging in some ways that way for like companies to understand that if someone has ADHD, it's like, okay, well, what do we do then? Like, what's our response, or what should we expect? And because of the fact that it is so diverse in terms of how it plays out with each individual person, there are some things that are general knowledge that can be helpful, but other things that will be more, individual. And it's mostly just be open to the other person and make sure that they have a space where they can speak and be heard. I think that's a basic starting point. Not that everyone has to be a specialist in ADHD. I don't think that's the case at all.
No.
But it's not. And I think that's one of the reasons why people don't, or at least I understand why they might be hesitant about bringing it up to their employers, is because of not wanting to say like, now I need you to become an expert on this, or that I'm asking for tons of additional help. We had one of our recent guests who works at Amazon talking about, accommodations. Like, they have a specific plan for that. Other companies don't. So it's always going to be different depending on where you are. Yep. But going back to the basic point, make other people who have lived through these experiences, part of the solution, and empower yourself by doing that. We're almost at the end in terms of timing, but I just want to see, is there any sort of final message that you'd like to give, any sort of key point of advice that you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I know it's hard. I thought about, before sharing my story on LinkedIn, posting about the ADHD part and the burnout. I know it's hard, but I think by sharing it, makes it easier to share it again. But also creates more awareness, which also makes it easier to talk about it, but also makes it easier to discuss, for example, with your employer about what you might need to perform the way you want to perform, and being able to do your work that you want to do. And that's work-wise. But I think you also, especially in my case, where I had next to the ADHD, also the mental health stuff. You really need to be open and willing to really open up about it, or else, it's nothing is going to help if you're not looking into why you do stuff the way you do, but also really look into what ADHD does to you, and what you can do to deal with it. If you just leave it as is and take a pill a day or a couple a day, that's not going to work. You need to make adjustments and think about why you do stuff the way you do it.
Excellent. And it's a great synthesis of the things that we spoke about.
Sharing is caring.
And sharing is good, but it's true is that no one can open that stuff up for you.
No,
like you have to take the step.
It's funny.
And the step can be small.
Yeah.
The step can be small.
That's funny. Once I shared it on LinkedIn, there was a lot of people who responded. But hey, I got the same. And you never knew. So there's a lot of people, I think, that walk around with either ADHD or mental health issues. Get to talk to each other and be open with it.
Fantastic. Good. We'll finish with that, Bram. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And look forward to seeing you online, offline, and to continue the conversation.
Yes, thanks, man. Thanks for your time.